when I first saw Unforgiven, I would have been 14, and I liked it because it's, you know, cool and serious and violent and brooding. And then I grew to kind of not disdain it, but just kind of sigh when I think about it, because it's so serious. It's all speeches. People accuse The Dark Knight of being all speeches just because it's a popular movie. This shit's all speeches. I mean, it's such a contrived effort to bring Eastwood's career as a Western star full circle, and I can appreciate it for what it is, but in the grand scheme of things, you just think it's so didactic and obvious. Because it is. This is such a high school English class idea of like a good movie. And yet it is very accomplished. And it is fascinating that another film came along by Eastwood to tarnish the myth of the West. High Plains Drifter was the first. It had come out 11 years after Fred Zinnemann and Gary Cooper's High Noon had done a similar thing, although that was closer within the, at least, aesthetic cinematographic format of Hollywood black and white westerns of the 1950s. High Plains Drifter was about as revisionist as you got at that time. And then Unforgiven is kind of the swan song of the revisionist westerns in general. There were some westerns in the 80s that were a more traditional bend. Even Eastwood's own Pale Rider is far more palatable and nice and sentimental than the likes of High Plains Drifter and the Outlaw Josie Wales. Unforgiven, one of my favourite things about Unforgiven is actually I really like the presence of Richard Harris's English Bob. One criticism that was thrown toward Unforgiven was, what's the point of English Bob in this narrative if he doesn't even cross paths with the main characters? This is almost more... Unforgiven, I would argue, is almost more interesting as a film about Little Bill. I remember forums on IMDb used to speculate that where Little Bill got his name from has a lot to do with why he spares the life of that knife-wielding cowboy from the start of the film. And I find that I like the cute irony wherein we destroy the idea of the famous outlaw gunslinger accompanied by the novelist character. You know, Gene Hackman's Little Bill kind of dismantles that, and then that author character becomes obsessed with Gene Hackman's character. But then Gene Hackman's character almost consciously dismantles the idea of the law-abiding, fair, sadistic sheriff. And I think that then William Money dismantles even more so for the author this idea of the noble outlaw. Money's response to Little Bill saying he saw him in hell, he simply states in the most Eastwood-like fashion imaginable, yeah, Money's looking forward to seeing Little Bill in hell. He's gonna kill him again, send him down to a deeper circle of hell. If the cosmology conforms to Dante's view, I suppose. Anyway, Unforgiven. This is one of the last Eastwood directed films, which I think is actually quite interesting. The rest of them really fall into this pattern of being didactic, boring films which try to espouse his particular American worldview, which would be fine if the films are interesting. I know some have championed Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I'll check that out again. We know I really like Letters from Iwo Jima. It's one of the few effective post-Platoon / Saving Private Ryan war films. I'll just say it quickly again because Eastwood is a hardcore American patriot. There was no way he was going to glorify the Japanese in war compared with how he depicted the Americans in Flags of Our Fathers the previous year. And so Letters from Iwo Jima did depict war as evil, wrong, or at least a series, an indifferent portrayal of men in strife who do wicked things but are ultimately still human. Sometimes. Letters from Iwo Jima is a good tone to take one of these war films in. I mean, that's intrinsically portraying these characters as though they're the, quote, bad guys, unquote, which might be the better approach for war films in general. I once argued, not that long ago, I don't think, that Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket was closer to this approach, where people like Sam Fuller disagree despite having, in Clonus Propaganda, despite having directed the Big Red One, which I do like, and I don't consider it propaganda, although I don't know if it's less gung-ho than Full Metal Jacket, The 50s war films by Fuller, sure, I can see that. The Big Red one, maybe Fuller himself distanced himself from that work. I don't know. Anyway, Unforgiven. Positive overall, although overly didactic and overrated in its own way. This is not the kind of film I would be discussing unless I was really trying to be fair with which Best Picture winner since 1987 that I like. When discussing Clint Eastwood's films maybe a year ago, I ended up avoiding Unforgiven. I couldn't be bothered rewatching it. Here, yeah, we'll give it its dues. It's fairly good. I don't think it's one of my absolute favourites, but I feel as though it's a solid venture all the same. Certainly.